Today we examine an extraordinary chess game. The game is full of fantastic tactical ideas, as it was played between two great tacticians, Vladimir Simagin and Leonid Stein. Stein, playing one of the most complicated lines of the Sicilian defense, gradually gains an advantage. But Simagin tries to turn the tables with one brilliant move after another. Eventually, all Simagin's pieces are hanging and his king is under direct threat of checkmate. White's position looks completely hopeless. But Simagin delivers another unexpected tactical blow that changes everything. No wonder this game earned Simagin the prize for the most brilliant game of the 28th USSR Championship. So let's dive in and see if you can also find all these fantastic moves. Simagin starts with e4, Stein plays the Sicilian defense, and after knight f3, d6, d4, c takes d, knight takes d4, knight f6, and knight c3, Stein goes for the Najdorf variation, a6, taking the b5 square under control, preventing the white pieces from invading this square and preparing the queenside expansion with b5. Simagin plays the most aggressive line, bishop g5, threatening to capture on f6, after which black would be forced to recapture with the pawn and his pawn structure would be damaged. That's why e6. Now it makes no sense to exchange because black would recapture with the queen, of course. White starts the expansion on the king side, f4. After h6 and bishop h4, instead of making the natural developing moves such as bishop e7 or knight d7, Stein goes for the most complicated line, the poisoned pawn variation. He plays queen b6, targeting the weak b2 pawn. And in order to fight for the initiative, instead of defending this pawn, white usually sacrifices it. So Simagin plays queen d2. Opening way for his king to the queenside. If black doesn't capture the pawn right away, white would castle queenside next move, defending the pawn, and the black queen would be misplaced on b6, blockading the b7 pawn and preventing it from moving to b5. That's why black has no choice. He must capture on b2, preventing white from castling queenside and attacking the rook. So black is up a pawn, but for the pawn, white has very good compensation. He is already ahead in development. He has developed 3 minor pieces, while black has only 1 developed minor piece. Besides that, white gets a chance to develop his rook with a tempo, rook b1. And again, black must move the queen, queen a3. And instead of possible sharp continuations such as e5 or f5, Simagin goes for a quieter and a more positional line. Now that the knight isn't defended by the queen, he exchanges on f6, forcing black to capture with a pawn. And it turns out that the black king will stay in the center, because it's too dangerous to castle queenside, as the queenside is weakened and white has the half-open b-file under his control, and the king side is also demolished. So the safest place for the black king is the center. And now Simagin will gradually try to initiate an attack on the black king. But first he ensures the safety of his king. He plays bishop e2, preparing the short castle, after which, unlike the black king, the white king will be absolutely safe. Besides that, white is ready to play bishop h5, which might be quite unpleasant. For example, if black makes the natural developing move knight d7, after bishop h5, the f-pawn would be pinned. That means the f7 pawn isn't really defending the e6 pawn, and white is ready to capture it. And after black defends it, let's say by knight c5, now the pawn is defended, white can increase the pressure by playing f5, threatening to capture on e6, after which black's position would be demolished. And the best thing black can do is to push the pawn to e5, however, that permanently weakens the d5 square and white would get a great outpost on this square. For this reason, after Simagin played bishop e2, in order to prevent the white bishop from invading the h5 square, Stein plays h5 himself. Simagin castles. Now it's time to develop the queenside, and of course black could have played knight c6, which looks like the natural active move, but probably Stein disliked the fact that after the exchange of the knights, the b-file would have opened, and that would have increased the activity of the white rook. The white rook would have controlled the only open file. For this reason, instead of knight c6, Stein develops the knight on d7. Simagin makes the standard prophylactic move king h1, moving the king away from this diagonal in order to prevent possible checks later in the game. Stein brings the queen back into play, queen c5, and Simagin activates his rook, rook h3. The rook controls the third rank and can operate on both sides, on the king side and on the queen side. Bishop e7 followed and rook h3. Attacking the h5 pawn for the second time. It's true, the pawn is defended at the moment twice, but white is threatening to play knight b3, attacking the queen and forcing her to leave the fifth rank. Indeed, she will not have a single square on the fifth rank after that, and after she leaves, white would be ready to capture on h5. So, in order to save the pawn, Stein pushes it forward. And that was exactly why Simagin played rook h3, to induce the black pawn to move to h4, because on h5 the black pawn controlled the g4 square, and now this important square is available for the white pieces, so later in the game the white pieces can invade it. And only now, after improving and activating his pieces, Simagin crosses the center of the board. f5, the move that signals the beginning of the attack. It's true, this move has a serious drawback. It permanently weakens the e5 square, and the black pieces, ideally the knight, will be greatly placed on this blockading square. However, f5 is the only way to initiate an attack. White is threatening to capture on e6, winning a pawn and destroying black's position, so black must do something about this threat. If he plays e5, again, the d5 square would be permanently weakened. For this reason, in order to defend against the threat of f takes e, black must move the knight away from the bishop's way. And the most natural square for the knight, of course, would be e5. However, it doesn't work, because the knight must also keep an eye on the b6 square. If the knight moves on e5, then the white knight would invade the b6 square. So first knight a4 with a tempo attacking the queen, and after the queen moves, knight b6 would follow with great effect. For example, after queen c7, knight b6 attacking the rook. After the rook moves, the rook can be rerouted to the queen side with a tempo. Then white can capture the bishop and get back the sacrificed pawn. His rook would dominate the 7th rank. e6 is under attack, a6 is under attack, black's position collapses. So, knight e5 doesn't work. For this reason, in order to defend the e6 pawn, Stein plays knight b6. Now the pawn is defended, and white cannot play knight a4, of course, because the black knight controls this square. Simagin moves the knight to d1. The idea is to reroute the knight to the king side, closer to the black king, so he's going to play knight e3 and then maybe knight g4. Besides that, by playing knight d1, Simagin has created an immediate threat. The c3 square is vacated for the rook. He is threatening to play rook c3 with a tempo, attacking the queen. The only square for the queen would be e5, but after that the queen would stop defending the knight and the second rook, of course, would capture it. So, to save the knight, Stein plays knight c4 with a tempo, attacking the white queen. The engine now recommends to exchange on c4, because the knight is very active and later in the game it will occupy the great e5 square. However, it's understandable that Simagin avoided the exchange, because he is down a pawn and also he has the space advantage. And when you have space advantage, you usually try to avoid the exchanges, because each exchange brings your opponent some relief. So, his queen is under attack, that's why he moves her to c3, attacking the knight. And of course, the knight invades this great blockading square. And black offers the exchange of the queens. And of course, after the exchange of the queens, white wouldn't have any chances to create an attack on the black king. he will be absolutely safe in the center of the board, and black would simply transition to the endgame with an extra pawn and with the advantage of 2 bishops. So Simagin avoids the exchange. Queen b2. Black still hasn't developed the queenside. He cannot play bishop d7 because the bishop must defend the pawn. The bishop is tied to the defense of this pawn. Otherwise, the queen would capture. That's why first Stein plays b5, preparing bishop d7 and rook c8. Knight e3, Simagin brings the knight back into play, bishop d7 follows, and now white would love to increase the pressure on the main target, on the e6 pawn, which is attacked twice and defended twice. So white would love to play queen b3, attacking the e6 pawn for the 3rd time. But it's impossible because the queen is tied to the defense of the knight. So first, Simagin reinforces the knight with c3, preparing queen b3 next move. Rook c8 follows, developing the rook with a tempo, attacking c3, rook c1, defending the pawn, and in the anticipation of queen b3, which would attack e6 for the 3rd time, Stein makes a strong move, bishop d8, vacating the e7 square for the king. So the king himself will defend the e6 pawn. Besides that, Stein is going to activate the dark squared bishop. Queen b3, attacking the e6 pawn, and of course king e7 followed. So it seems that it's clear that black has successfully defended the e6 pawn. There is no way white can attack it one more time. That means white should look for new targets, and Simagin has detected the new target, which is the f6 pawn, and maybe even the h4 pawn. So he reroutes the queen from the queen side to the king side, queen d1. The idea is to move the queen to f1, to the f file, followed by queen f2, from which the queen would attack the pawn, the h4 pawn, together with the rook. But the main idea behind queen f2 will be vacating the f1 square for the rook, after which white would create the queen and rook battery on the f-file, then he would capture on e6, opening the f-file and attacking the f6 pawn. That's the plan. Stein plays bishop b6, activating the bishop, queen f1 follows, and queen a3, creating an immediate threat of bishop takes d4, c takes d, after which the rook would fall. And to parry this threat, and to activate his rook, which is tied to the defense of the c3 pawn and is quite passive, Simagin sacrifices the 2nd pawn. He plays rook d1. Now the rook is much more active and it's targeting the weak and backward d6 pawn. Stein accepts the sacrifice. Rook takes c3. Now he is 2 pawns up. Besides that, he is threatening to capture the knight. The knight is attacked twice and defended only once. But Simagin captures on e6, opening the f-file, and attacking the bishop in his turn. And the knight is untouchable, because the f5 square is vacated now, it's weakened, and if black captures, then after the exchanges, of course, the white knight would invade, forking the king and the queen. So as the knight, the e3 knight, is untouchable, and as the bishop is under attack, of course, Stein captures on e6. And we have reached our first critical position. It seems that black has defended against all threats, he is 2 pawns up, and he is threatening to capture on e3, winning a piece. So what should white do? You can pause the video and try to find Simagin's idea. The e6 pawn is overworked. It must defend both the f5 square and the d5 square. And both of these squares are attacked by the white knights. So Simagin exploits this. He invades the f5 square. Knight f5 check. Also moving the knight away from the d file, attacking the d6 pawn. And it turns out that black cannot capture the knight. If he does, the pawn would disappear from e6, it would stop defending the d5 square, and the second knight would invade this square with great effect with a check, and the rook on c1 would fall. So the knight on f5 is untouchable. That means black must move the king. It makes no sense to move the king to e8 or f7, as white is going to capture on d6 with the knight anyways, so it would come with a check. So the king must move to d8, because king f8 doesn't make sense either, as after knight takes d6 there will be a very unpleasant x-ray on the f-file. So Stein moves the king to d8. And now knight takes d6. And it turns out that black still doesn't have time to capture the knight on e3, because the white knight has moved away from f5, from the f-file, and white is threatening queen takes f6. Check, attacking everything, the rook, and, which is more important, the knight. So Stein defends the f6 pawn by playing rook f8. And we have reached another critical position. So again, it seems that black has successfully defended his weaknesses, and again, black is ready to capture the knight. So what should white do next? It might seem that the white should play knight g4. Indeed, what can be more natural? The knight is under attack, so white should play knight g4. However, Stein prepared rook takes h3. And it might seem that white has a strong move, knight takes e5, as the knight is untouchable, as the rook on f8 would fall. Besides that, white is threatening to capture on h3, and if black saves the rook, let's say if he plays rook c3, white can simply capture on d7, and after king takes d7, knight takes b5, discovered check, and white is winning the queen. But it isn't the case, because after knight takes e5, instead of saving the rook, Stein prepared rook takes h2 check, followed by queen g3 check, followed by queen takes e5, and again black is 2 pawns up, and white doesn't have sufficient attacking resources to continue his attack, so black is winning. For this reason, natural knight g4 doesn't work. But what else white can do? Black is threatening to capture the knight. So you can pause the video and try to find Simagin's spectacular idea. In order to open the h file, Simagin sacrifices the knight. He plays rook takes h4, letting black capture the knight, and now we can see the idea. The f6 pawn is still the main target, and it's defended only by the black rook. So Simagin plays rook h8, threatening to capture the rook. Besides that, the rook is pinned, so white is also actually threatening to capture on f6 right away. For this reason, Stein captures on h8, but now the f6 pawn falls with a check, and also the rook and the knight fall under attack. The only move is king c7. Now white has to choose what piece to capture. Of course, Simagin captures the knight, because this is black's best piece, the great centralized knight. Besides that, queen takes e5 comes with a tempo. There is a very unpleasant x-ray now, and white is threatening to capture on b5 with the discovered check, followed by knight takes a3, winning the queen. So black has no time to save the rook, he must save the queen. So, to prevent the discovered check, Stein plays king c6. And we have reached another critical position. So what next? Should white capture the rook, or there is something else? You can pause the video and try to find it. So capturing the rook would be a mistake, because after queen takes h8, black simply captures on e2, and it turns out that black is up a piece and white's attack has faded away. Instead, Simagin continues the attack. The black king has moved away from c7 to prevent the discovered check with knight takes b5, but Simagin still plays it. Although it comes without a check, still it's very strong. Knight takes b5, attacking the queen and moving the knight away from d6 which increases the power of the white rook. Now the d file is open. And it turns out that if black captures the knight, his king gets checkmated in 4 moves. Queen takes b5 check, rook takes d7 check, followed by checkmate. For this reason, as the queen is under attack, Stein saves her, bringing her closer to the black king to defend him. But now the rook invades the d6 square with a check. And of course the rook is untouchable as the knight, together with the queen, is defending it. So the only move is king b7. But now the bishop falls with a check. However, Stein prepared king c8, after which we have reached another critical position. This time, absolutely fantastic position, because all white pieces are under attack. The rook is under attack, the knight is under attack, the queen and the bishop. All pieces are under attack. Besides that, which is even more important, if it was black's move, instead of capturing all these pieces, he would have checkmated the white king, because black is also threatening queen c1 check, and after rook d1, queen takes d1 check, bishop takes d1, followed by rook e1 checkmate. So white's position looks absolutely hopeless, because all white pieces are under attack and the white king is also in trouble. Black is threatening checkmate in 3. And most probably Stein was sure that he was going to win this game. However, Simagin calculated one move further. And you can pause the video and try to find another spectacular blow. This time the black bishop is overworked. It must defend the queen and also the c7 square. So Simagin exploits this. Rook c7 check. If black captures with the bishop, the queen wouldn't be defended and white would simply capture her, threatening checkmate in 1 and also attacking the rook. Black must defend against the checkmate by capturing the knight, after which the rook falls and white gets a very big material advantage. For this reason, after rook c7 check, Stein captures with the queen. And of course, the knight captures the queen. So, both white minor pieces are under attack, but black has no time to capture them because his rook is still under attack. And if black simply saves the rook, let's say if he plays rook d8, then white saves both of his pieces by playing bishop takes a6 check and continues the attack. That would lead to a deadly king hunt. For this reason, instead of simply moving the rook somewhere, Stein tries his last chance. He sacrifices the rook. Rook takes h2 check. If white captures with the king, that would be a terrible blunder, because after bishop takes c7, the queen would be pinned and lost. That's why, of course, Simagin must capture with the queen. And now we can see Stein's idea, why he sacrificed the rook. One by one, he will capture the minor pieces. First he captures the bishop, and white doesn't have time to save the knight, because black is threatening rook e1 check, after which the only move white would have would be queen g1 and the queen would be lost. So white must save the queen. So Simagin plays queen h8 check, vacating the h2 square for the king, and black captures the knight. But Simagin still has material advantage, so let's see how he converts it. Queen c3 check follows, king b7, queen c4, defending both pawns, attacking the rook and attacking the e6 pawn. Rook e1 check follows, king h2, bishop c7 check, king h3, rook h1 check, king g4, rook h2, attacking the g2 pawn, king f3, defending it, rook h6, defending the e6 pawn, but after a few checks, queen b4 check, queen c3 check, queen b2 check, the queen moves to g7, forcing the black rook to move away from the 6th rank, after which the pawn would fall. So the rook moves away and queen g8 check. The king cannot defend the pawn because queen f7 check followed by queen takes h5 would follow, so the king moves to b7, but now the pawn falls. And after rook a5 and g4, it turns out that the a2 pawn is defended and the g pawn is unstoppable because white is going to play queen g8 and then g5, g6, and there is nothing black can do about it. For this reason, Stein resigned. And now I recommend watching another attacking masterpiece by Simagin, in which he defeats none other than the legendary Viktor Korchnoi. But first, I'd be grateful if you like this video and subscribe, as it's really helpful for the channel growth.